Therefore, pranotthana is much more desirable because it doesn't destroy the vehicle of the body, you see? Whereas Kundalini doesn't care for the body. You need to understand the difference. It literally doesn't care for the body. It flew out of my mouth some 12, 15 years ago. It doesn't take prisoners.
My question is related with the dream state. I know you have touched on this in many YouTube videos, including the Kundalini course, but I feel that I'm still looking for some answers. I've been experiencing heightened state of awareness in my dreams. I always recognize that I'm dreaming, and I'm consciously navigating these states. I'm receiving constantly downloads and information that I bring to my awakening states. And I also receive energy transmissions, either from higher powers or even teachers. Recently, I have had a Kundalini release experience during a dream. I felt a surge of heat in my base, in my spine, going all the way up as a current of electricity, mostly to the left side of my spine. I tried to open my eyes and bring awareness in my dreams like I always do. And when I did, I opened my eyes and everything was melting. I was in an altered state of consciousness in the dream itself and when I was going back to the awakening state, because I can go back and forth from the dream and I can go back to awakening state. That day, I felt a lot of loose in my base of my spine. My body felt like very light and a lot of bliss. So I have a few questions relating to this. Maybe I can go by one or give you them all. First, what is the role of these dreams in spiritual evolution? Are these realizations and activations that I've been having in dreams just as important and impactful as if I would be having them in the awakening state? Would you recommend that I work on this further? And these are happening for me spontaneously. I don't try to make them happen. And where does a dream state falls related to the Tavic structure of reality? Does it fall in Maya, in the instruments of realization, of perception?
Waking, dreaming, deep sleep are the relative states. And they're called relative because they come and go. And they have duration, right? They're not permanent. They come and go, come and go. In modern language, in language equipped with, let's say, what we know from the science of neurophysiology, right? The science of how the brain waves function, right? How our brains and how the whole entire nervous system goes through certain frequencies throughout, let's say, 24-hour, like it's a chosen kind of randomly number, and how it all relates to the activity of the nervous system, right? Waking state is characterized by the acuity of the working of the senses and the mind, right? And the senses find the expressions through the body, which is equipped with organs of cognition. We could even say that the body per se is an organ of cognition. So, just like in any system, as what we speak of now, there has to be, activity has to alternate. So when the mind and the nervous system get saturated working in one mode, it needs to change. So therefore, waking state is being replaced by the dreaming state. And in addition, you probably have heard, I don't know if we have in-depth videos out there, but probably we do, that in addition to these three relative states, there are sub-states, right? In other words, they would be waking in, dreaming and waking, waking and waking, deep sleep and waking. And likewise in relation to all the other two, right? So 9 altogether. So it's 9 relative states. And then it is also further helps to understand the differences in terms of how we experience waking state. Right? When we get very tired, we get dozy and drowsy, kind of almost sleepy, but we're still in a waking state of consciousness. We still perceive, senses are still active, right? Information supplied by organs of cognition, electrical responses in the brain and all that is still intact. But it is as if dimmed, right? So this is where it will fall into that, right? Dreaming and waking. So it's not waking and waking. And there are phases when we the best way to understand this is in the comparison when you drive long distances and you sit right next to the driver and you don't need to drive, right? And you get tired and you just suddenly blank out and then suddenly you wake up again, right? Blank out, right? And suddenly you wake up. It's an example of deep sleep in waking. And likewise, this is now can be further expounded on the 2 other relative states. So our dream state is not all homogeneous. So in dream state, there are these transitory other states, right? So we don't go to sleep. No, we do. We can actually fall asleep when we're really tired. Children fall asleep like that very often. Where they play, they just fall asleep there and then. But we linger, get into bed, into our jammies, right? And lay down, toss and turn. And so this drift off into a sleep. So this, we could say how from waking and dreaming, it then takes over and dreaming until deep sleep and dreaming, right? When deep sleep and dreaming, we have difficulty to remember our dreams. See, because it has infusion of unconscious. So the value in relation to Tattvas, these are states. You see, they're not Tattvas. There's no correlation to speak about them as Tattvas. So when we speak about Tattvas, the Tattva of water, right, as a subtle element, right, in the Mahabhutas and grand elements, Tattva of earth, Tattva of fire, Tattva of air, Tattva of ether, right, that there is this permanency about these Tattvas. Even if we speak of them as, let's say, belonging to the category of all under the category, and how we called it today under the spell of Maya, they still have their permanency, in a sense that that permanency is displayed in chemical composition. For example, when it comes to water, water remains H2O irrespective of stage it undergoes. H2O in ice, H2O in vapor. So this is why the states of consciousness are not spoken in relation to Tattvas. So they're not Tattvas. So that's for your understanding of this. Now, of course, dreams are very important. There's a whole yoga that known as Nidra yoga, where one literally it's a yoga of conscious sleeping. In the average person, sleeping is a very sort of like unexamined event, right? It taken for what it is. Tired, go to sleep, dream, blank out during deep sleep, wake up, get on with my day. Or had a good dream, had a bad dream, nightmare, let me check out what it means, right? Or don't remember my dreams. And But of course, for someone like yourself and for all those who are, let's say, on the path in, let's say, these phases where everything becomes charged with certain, let's say, providing certain information for the evolution and growth, dreams provide fertile ground for that what otherwise not available in waking state of consciousness. It's simply not available. What is not available? Let's just maybe touch this. Waking state of consciousness corresponds to conscious state. Dreaming state corresponds to subconscious. And deep sleep corresponds to unconscious, right? So this is ABC of spirituality in a way. And then, of course, there is the fourth, the transcendent, the Turiya. This is, it doesn't come and go. It's the sub-state, it's substratum. All these relative states of consciousness could be said are rotating frequencies around one and only permanent Turiya. And of course, there are degrees, gradations. Then different traditions give this, expound this further, right? The Turiya is further divided into Turiya and Turiyatita, beyond the fourth. And then, in some traditions, the Turiyatita is then further broken into degrees of subtlety and refinement. See? I'm going to relax the Sanskrit terms so as not to burden your memory now. But in English language, for example, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi defined this as cosmic, God, and unity consciousness. Cosmic consciousness, God consciousness, unity consciousness. And each of these states characterized by the relationship of subject and object. Of course, that's what we will have been talking about. But degrees of the intimacy. See? So cosmic corresponds as a blanket to Turiyatita, and transcendental corresponds to Turiya, to the fourth. So, but somehow our life revolves around these three relative states. These relative states is what comprises most people's experiences, unless their life is somehow takes vertical dimension, and then by whatever virtue of grace or personal effort or encounter or good karma, whatever we may call that, generating it from previous life, there is this access. Some of us born into this world already experiencing transcendence. We do experience transcendence. Let's also not forget that. We do experience transcendence in very, very small portions. During the change of the breath from the left to right, Then the breath flows through Sushumna for however short. That's transcendence, granted. Each Dvadashanta is little transcendence here, right? Incoming breath, pause, outgoing breath, pause. Both these poses are transcendence. So transcendence is touched. Touched here, touched there. Otherwise we'll go bonkers in no time. And of course in deep sleep, I call it poor man's nirvana, right? Don't do anything. You are given this like switch off mode, right? Doesn't matter how hectic one is and everything, right? You may be the commander-in-chief of the entire, military of the United States, biggest boss there running around. But deep sleep, you're just sleeping like a baby, snoring your way out. And the value of this, of course, for the spiritual aspirant is that what cannot be accessed in waking state is processed in dreaming. So already that's the value. What cannot be processed consciously in waking state, because that's what it corresponds to. It corresponds to the conscious activity. where it has to make sense. That's the way we function. So, but in dreams, we do phantasmagoric things, and things happen where laws of nature don't necessarily have their sway, right? In dreams, we can fly, right? In dreams, we can do incest. In dreams, we can do things that we would not dream of doing in waking state, right? We trespass and transgress into the territory what would not be considered to be normal, acceptable, and so it goes, you see? So in other words, we are much freer in dreaming. In fact, there is somewhere one could say we are truly freer in our dreams. The true sense of freedom is experienced in our dreams only. In a waking state, we are always restrained, constrained by limitations of that what and how we've been instructed, how we've been, let's say, educated, brought up, indoctrinated, brainwashed, and so forth. So it creates that state of confinement without us maybe not thinking that way until we realize that, and we want to push these boundaries. We want to push these boundaries. And if these boundaries refuse to be pushed, sometimes we're ready to break these boundaries, right? Break these boundaries because they feel now like a mold. In dreams, we don't have these boundaries. So that's the tremendous value and importance of dreams. Dreams can and do provide access to that what gives us full sense of who we are in terms of our psychology, our psyche. And because of that, of course, and not only because of that, but because of that as well, there is a whole unique yoga known as yoga Nidra, yoga of sleep, yoga of conscious sleep. So whereas we, as normal beings, consider sleep the time when we get conked out, and in fact, some of us love to be conked out and nothing else. We even take pills to get conked out. We take this and that just to be knocked out, right? To become unconscious, like consciously become unconscious, right? Paradoxical almost statement here, but that's the case. Whereas the approach of those who are, let's say, understanding the value of this is that they utilize sleep as the means to enter into the core, the heart of the consciousness. You see? Because the similarity of a deep sleep and samadhi, they are cousins. Samadhi and deep sleep are cousins. Samadhi, sushupti are very, very similar. Because in both there is nothing. Cessation of all activity. Cessation of all mental activity. All sensory activity. We abide there, as it were, in this state of consciousness which is characterized by freedom from all this, what otherwise acts as, let's say, filters. See? So with regard to that, what you're experiencing now, right, this in relation to this activation of life force and increased pranic activity, whether this is Kundalini or just Pranotthana, that's another story. We don't want to just like jump to making conclusions. We can't. We can't because I would say if it was Kundalini, it would have displayed itself differently. If you want to talk about this, we can touch certain distinctions. But Pranotthana, there's nothing wrong with Pranotthana. Pranotthana is not some kind of like inferior in a sense of, it's like all people want Kundalini. No, you don't want Kundalini. Trust me, you don't want Kundalini awakened unless you decided to say goodbye to these aspirations in the world. Now let's just bust the bubble there and then. Everyone who say, I want Kundalini and Kundalini activation, no. When Kundalini happens, really, it's at the end of your world, the end of the idea and notion of yourself. See? There has to be profoundly strong psychic container to withstand that. But Pranotthana is on the rise. The field is active now. So it happens to people around the world much more frequent than 20, let alone 40 years ago, let alone 60 years ago. Although I don't totally buy that, I feel there's a cyclicity. And with the peers in the field, I had held some private, interesting exchanges, conversations with people who are not generation, but let's say 10 years older than me, right? So that's half of the generation. Generation is measured usually by 20 years. This, let's say, activations were also very common in the 60s. Very common. Some say because of the years of the counterculture, because people were willing to experiment with drugs, rock and roll, conscience-altering substances, right? Opened up this, sexual freedom for the first time to experimenting. So, of course, there was all this on the rise. A big exodus of spiritual teachings from the East into the West, from India above all else, but of course not only, from Japan, from China, from Korea, right? So these activations, not all Kundalini, and these activations need to be understood also for their value. And the value here is tremendous because you can still live your individuality intact in the unfoldment of the, let's say, expansion of the pranic currents and pranic activity. With Kundalini is not always granted. Kundalini can assault the ahamkara with such tremendous force, and it could result in unplugging to such degree that it will be very hard to put all this back into the order. Right? It will just have one blackout after another in the house, We don't want that. It's like, let's not. So I'm just saying, but it all has tremendous value because there's a great analogy and similarity in terms of Pranotthana as a process and Kundalini as a process, because the purification of nadis, the purging of stresses and traumas, right? Expansion of the light body, all this is part and parcel of a fully active Pranotthana phase and process. So what is there to complain? It's kind of almost, I would say, more desirable, if you see what I mean. More desirable. Like, just as an example, somewhere in Robert Svoboda's trilogy, that what made his name well known, right? The left hand of God, Kundalini, and the law of karma. I forgot which one. He gives this example of how this yogi sits in meditation on a rock for however many years and does penance, does tapas, right? And burns with tapas completely, becomes bright. So he wins the boon from the highest maybe of the divinities, and Shiva or Vishnu comes, okay, good for you. What would you like? Name your boon. And the yogi would not have it. He goes with the kind of like really, really stone cold face. I want justice. And she was like, I don't have much time. Just like, come, hurry up, man. What do you want? And the yogi in lotus is shining bright. I want justice, right? I want justice. And she was like, you don't want justice, man. Just quick. I like, really, really, you know? And looking at his fine watch and just thinking, what's next? No, justice or bust. All right, you want justice? Here we got. And that slab of rock on which he sat for 20 years turns around and squashes the yogi as a bug. You wanted justice. You sat on a rock. Now rock will be on top of you. See? That's all. That's like, if you know. So this example also is like, you know, that very few people out there truly understand the full measure of what it means to undergo Kundalini awakening and a process. And they go for that consciously because that is the highest, let's say, that's the goal. You see? That's the goal. They prepare, hone the bodies, literally through tremendously powerful sadhana, full of austerities, so that it can withstand that power. You know, the whole system is rewired, shines so that when molten gold unleashed, it all runs through the filaments finer than the spider's web. In a normal human being, if Kundalini unleashed, it will create a tremendous havoc. It will splatter it across the ceiling. It will create a mess. You see? Above all else, psychologically unprepared. We're barely getting to know ourselves, who we are at this state of normal psychological development. You see? And here we're talking about walking out of it at all. Maybe there are far few between to whom it happens, but it's most likely because it happened already in previous life. As the voice that speaks to you now, it happened in previous life already. So there was no choice but to go through that. But the process of activation of prana and pranotthana, it's a gift. It's a gift to remain intact, the vessel, you see, and prepare this for whatever, for a beautiful thing, for expressing yourself, for someone like yourself, so young, you know, are you ready to kiss goodbye the life? Life as you know it? And walk away on it? No. You want family, children, human, earthly happiness. No? I can see it in your eyes. Exactly. In your smile. That is what is beautiful. That honesty and admonition. So therefore, you know, consider this as just, yes, the highest blessing, right? This activation is soul's maturity, right? Like this rekindling, revitalizing the body, revitalizing all the bodies. And it happens in a dream or in a waking state, makes no difference. It has the value because, you see, when we say that it doesn't happen to the physical body, of course, will be affected. Of course, but it happens in a subtle body. And subtle astral body, in any case, belongs to the subtle state of consciousness, which corresponds to dreaming state anyway, just as the deep sleep corresponds to the causal body. See? The gross, subtle, causal. So, not sure if I missed anything in your other inquiries and your other questions, but how? Yes.
I've been looking a lot of guidance, and thank God I found you. I started with Vipassana. That's when I started my first awakening, if we can call it that way. And when this dream started to happen, and that integration for me was very rough, I was feeling energies everywhere, and have felt them since very little. And when I started doing pranic activations, my life changed. I suffered from a lot of illnesses and chronic pain. When through Western medicine, nothing worked, this actually saved my life in many ways. And once I came back to my normal life after those trainings, activations, I couldn't function properly. I was having arousals. I was having so much bliss, love, understanding of Maya matrix, everything dissolving, more dreams. And I decided to do this as a full-time, as my way to be devoted to this practice. I became very devoted and with a longing to be of service. And I needed this guidance. And I did the Kundalini course, trying to figure it out if I was having just pranic activation. But part of me will think, wow, I've changed so much. And I've healed not only me, but even lineage in my family, relationships, many things happening. I've gathered this energy to also create divine inspiration and projects in a beautiful way. And I was wondering if is this just a pranic activation, or it could be related with a partial release, or some sort of release, or maybe setting any chakra right now. I will say maybe the heart. Or is it just still pranic movement happening?
Okay, so let's now make this so there's no black or white or like strictly divided territory here. So there's sort of room for subtlety. So distinction between Pranotthana and Kundalini is in terms of fundamental shift in identity. It's the shift in identity. In Kundalini, it is irreversible. And as I said, it assaults the sense of identity above all else. Assaults that what in Sanskrit known as ahamkara. Ahamkara needs to be very strong. In other words, Kundalini, in fact, as the process, is undesirable among spiritual aspirants who have been, for example, for a long time in the setting where the ego has been clobbered, in that kind of like this meek, kind of like a spiritual being who minds his or her space and like very kind of, that like kind of, it's not good, because it will be that example of, we don't want that. The depersonalization is most likely is the outcome. And that depersonalization has gradations, degrees. Depersonalization can be a regression into a state of a child. In other words, consciousness regressed all the way to the pre-developmental stages. Right? There are dramatic cases like that. In the West as well, but of course all this gets medicated, goes very quickly, so we don't hear of that. It's not, it's not out there staring at us in the face. By virtue of this work, I have encountered people in rehabilitating stages, encountered people who have gone through that process whilst I knew them, you see? In some cases, I could do nothing because their family would literally take these people and lock them away. See, and prevent any contact. So, but that doesn't mean it always works in this way. See, with Pranotthana, on the other hand, it doesn't assault that. It doesn't create shift in identity. Ahamkara remains intact. Reasons for that are very, very subtle, because the release of Kundalini from its seat, from its base, is accompanied by what will then be determined by accumulation of karmas. And then that accumulation of karmas, literally in Indian tradition, there is a term, right timing, the right timing, muhurta, right timing for everything, right timing to move to the new house, to travel, to start new business, to get married, to celebrate, right timing, all associated with the movements of the planets, their combination, and the energetic, let's say, frequencies they create. And it can be seen from the astrological point of view when that is the right timing, of course. See? When that timing is right, then there is this support of all, let's say, what now is accompanying the process. Do you understand what I'm saying? In other words, it enjoys the support. Let me just make a leap. Sometimes I want to be understood. At other times, I don't really care if you understand or not. It's not about being understood. It's because this is nothing to do with 2 + 2 is 4. This is not like that. So you got it, right? So we're not making sense here. We're not to make sense here either. But something, along the lines. When Vishnu incarnates, he never incarnates alone. This is an interesting thing. No Mahavatar ever comes alone. There's even this beautiful understanding that, dreaming there on this giant serpent Sesha in that state, and the world is in calamity and needs to be saved, right? And so all the laws of nature gather, all these lesser gods are now all of them calling for Vishnu. Because his job, that's his dharma, that's his purpose. He needs to reincarnate, he needs to come, he needs to have body. He can't just work from behind the scenes. This is the way it works. And that's the beauty of it. So, and Vishnu has this condition always. I will only come if so-and-so and so-and-so, so-and-so, in other words, he wants to have all his bodies reincarnate. See? All his bodies. So in Ramayana, you're aware of that scripture, right? No? Ramayana, right? Where Rama is Rama is there. He's one of the incarnations of Vishnu, and he is there to free the world from the terrible demon Ravana, right? And the plot need to be created, so Sita need to be stolen. So the whole thing to take Rama out of his comfort zone so that he actually goes after Ravana, so right? But all along he's accompanied by his younger brother, Lakshman. And Lakshman is the incarnation of Shiva, right? Lakshman is the incarnation of Shiva. And that's very, very interesting because Shiva, in that pantheon, has the utmost hand, even in that classical trinity, in the Trimurti. Shiva have the utmost upper hand, you see? And yet his hands are always, so his eyes are always down. He doesn't even know how the face of Sita looks. When asked to describe her, he can't describe I never seen her face. He don't dare to look at her, He only knows how her feet look. So he describes her feet, and she was wearing the ornaments of the ring on one of her toes. Right? He's there. But when in the battle for Lanka, when the Lanka was sacked, he's the one who wins the most important battle. He wins the battle with the son of Ravana, Indrajit, who was more powerful than his father. Rama laying down, nearly dying, and Lakshman enters the battlefield. All this is like muses were done. Why am I saying this now? Simply because you make sense out of that. There needs to be a combination when all these powers assist the process. You see? So this is, when that happens, right, then something is transformed properly. Something is really, really meant. And in terms of, let's say now, more clinical perspective, it doesn't have to be, of course, that you want to know whether this is, is this. Yes, it could be a slow release, a gradual, right? We speak about that in the course, gradual, intermediate, and violent, right? Rapid. And gradual is desirable, right? Slow, gradual, desirable, more desirable, because the integration is possible, right? The phases of burnout are much less. So I always, I like to say that a sliver of its release creates Sistine Chapels and the greatest music. And, like the sliver of its release creates saints, creates people of great orientation in life, right? So what is there to complain, right? So it's like, in our day and age, like there's so many, like everyone talks about Kundalini as a, I don't know, it's like as, I don't even know what to compare it with, like summer holiday camp, like you just went on and come back full enlightened, just light zooming out of your Sahasrara, and you just like, walking on. It's just ridiculous. It's just very, very bizarre. And, so of course, and I just caught myself, I've been speaking about this for so many years, and it's like, my God, time to, time to kind of bring some clarity, because I assume that it's obvious. What a naive fool. All this time, I thought this is obvious. No. And people, my own students asking me some year, what do you think of this Kundalini activation, what is it, CAP, KAP? Now I have to look into that. That's nothing to do with Kundalini whatsoever, right? And then there are like, therapists are created on the spot. I don't know how long are these programs, but what you're experiencing is authentic. I could feel it. I could see it. You speak about this, and it's the greatest blessing. It's beauty, right? So what confirmation do you need? What inspiration?
I was trained in CAP. I was trained in CAP level 1, level 2. Some people just had a cathartic process, somatic release. For me, went beyond that. Mostly because I think I've been in the path for a long time, since I was 11 years old, reading Osho in a very theoretical way, then experiencing Vipassana, seeing beings, having these lucid dreams where I'm very aware of these dreams and not knowing what was happening in me. After I finished my trainings, then my entire life shifted, and 20 years of illnesses dissoluted completely after spending years in Western medicine. Me being this feeling of devotion, of being of service, of feeling bliss, heart opening, being service of others. From one day to the other, I said, I cannot work in corporate job anymore. I need to do this full time, receiving divine inspiration to create things in arts, in design, in poetry. So the type of confirmation, and when I facilitate this session for other people, I can see that there is a somatic aspect to it, a cathartic practice aspect to it. People come to classes and they leave and nothing happened. They go on with their own life perfectly fine. They had a release. Some others are having a spiritual process going on.
Sure. Yes, of course.
And me having this awareness and this feeling of grace, of heart opening, in this last meditation, I felt my heart like it had its own life. and the way it was moving. I have never experienced that before. It was beyond myself. And then I had just this idea of like, is this just Pranatana? Can Pranatana go that far and be so much of healing and can really shift someone's life? Because it really shifted for me from one day to the next. I used to take painkillers, antidepressants. I was heavily medicated.
Well, but that's what Pranatana is, you see? The life force is the prana. That's all that conducts all affairs in the house.
And this Pranatana can
when you say, is it just Pranatana? I don't get that. It's not just. It is. Prana is all there is. Prana, the active agency of consciousness.
And this energy can move through the chakras and
Yes,
opening
of course.
the heart.
Completely.
Third eye.
Yes, it can do all that.
It's not that I'm looking for the CDs, but they're happening.
Yes, well, fantastic. It's amazing. Just you are the only one who know what this is. Just don't create some false notions that would, effectively speaking, sooner or later backfire. See? This is why it's always good to have kind of like some solid understanding, like rise with the feet on the ground, right? So we ascend, but we don't depart, right? When we create this distinction and speak of this distinction, it's for the sake of clarity, you see? For the sake of clarity. Because Kundalini process is one thing, Pranatana is another, and traditionally is so. And someone who wants to undergo Kundalini awakening fully, it's very, very different, because it does not happen from any personal application whatsoever. You see? It's a combination of everything. This is why I gave the story of Vishnu. When Vishnu wants to agrees to reincarnate, he says, all of you coming. I'm not going to go alone. All of you coming. See, that's what Kundalini is. Kundalini is not traveling in your Sushumna. Sushumna is the filament where it travels with the speed of light. And the whole manifestation is transgressed. See? So this is why people no longer people. The notion of oneself is extinguished. You come out of the notion of the self completely. And this is a biggest assault one can ever experience. It's nothing to compare with anything that one can find even in psychological descriptions of breakdown of personality and all the rest of this. Even though Kundalini can create so much havoc in the system which is clogged, that it will display itself in all that, where all it comes with hosts of different alignments that one would never be able to put it back together. So therefore, Pranatana is much more desirable because it doesn't destroy the vehicle of the body, you see? Whereas Kundalini doesn't care for the body. You need to understand the difference. It literally doesn't care for the body. It flew out of my mouth some 12, 15 years ago. It doesn't take prisoners. That the term, see? And that is so. So this is why it is wide in use, and I said very often in high level of training of pranic healing, that's what happens. Not even in a group. Pranic healer is in this room in Poland, in Odechowo, and someone who undergoes that could be now in Washington, D.C. And the person will have all these movements and maybe not full cathartic experiences, but the body would feel electric charges and, how is that possible? How physics cannot explain that. Physics cannot explain that. See? But in pranic healing, it's the third degree. Third degree of healing it's a distant healing. You can heal person by name alone, not without even photograph. Photograph helpful, but sometimes just the name. I mean, look into the book, today there's no books anymore, right? Like how many Sergios and how many and Anthony's and how many Peters and Michaels, right? Hundreds of thousands. So which one is being healed? See?